Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago. Today, this week, a threequel, a Looney Tunes spin-off, and munging some power. I'm your host, Jared, and today is June 2nd, 1993. This video is sponsored by Magic Spoon. Click the link in the description below or go to magicspoon.com/now90s to receive $5 off your first order today. We love reminiscing about the yesteryears, playing our favorite video games while munching down on our favorite cereals. As adults now, those games are still just as good, but the cereal we ate growing up doesn't hold up. That's where Magic Spoon comes in. Magic Spoon is cereal reinvented, a simple cereal choice for mindful adults. Enjoy the flavor and taste that you remember eating, but without all the sugary overloads. Magic Spoon cereal is high in protein, has 0 grams of sugar, and has only 4 to 5 net grams of carbs per serving. It's also gluten-free, grain-free, and keto-friendly. When putting together your own variety box, you can choose from a multitude of flavors. Some of my personal favorites are cookies and cream, blueberry muffin, and fruity. I used to spend a lot of Saturday mornings watching cartoons, playing Nintendo, and eating cereal. Thanks to Magic Spoon, I can finally eat cereal for breakfast again, while still doing those same things, wrapped in a blanket. That's magicspoon.com/now90s. Get $5 off your first order and bring back your nostalgic Saturday mornings. And once again, thank you to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this video. Need I remind you that there was a third console vying for market share in the early 90s. Released in June 1993, was Bonk 3, Bonk's Big Adventure for the TurboGrafx 16. Bonk 3 continues the familiar gameplay of the series. Play as Bonk the Cave Boy, running forward and smashing your forehead against enemies. It also has the different candies, allowing Bonk to grow to a massive size or to very tiny. You can still collect meat to transform Bonk into an angrier Bonk, and then into whatever this horrific heart-shaped head monstrosity is supposed to be. Innovative for its time is that Bonk 3 has 2-player simultaneous co-op, with the second player controlling another Bonk and sharing a life bar. Be careful though, because you can and will bonk each other. Amidst the war between Sonic and Mario, from the sidelines of the shots fired between Sega and Nintendo, there was a third, meekly screaming, "Don't forget about me!" Bonk was positioned as the mascot for Hudson and their TurboGrafx 16 console. But that wasn't always the case. Bonk first hit the console in 1990, a full year before Sonic's existence. He also started out as a comic character for the Japanese PC Engine magazine, simply named PC Caveman. Those comics were so popular and readers frequently mistook Bonk as an upcoming game character that they finally decided to give him his own game. It worked so well that he became the face of the PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16.
Today's lesson. Now get 2 free games for $69.99.
With it being another flagship game for the console, how did Bonk 3 do? Pretty good. GamePro magazine awarded it with an overall 4 out of 5, and Electronic Gaming Monthly scored it with a respectable 7.75 out of 10. Everyone loved the graphics, the gameplay, and especially the 2-player modes, even if it was just more of the same. Bonk 3 would get a re-release 1 year later in 1994, this time for the Turbo Duo. It's exactly the same game, only the CD gives a much better soundtrack to jam out to. This would also be the last Bonk game for the flailing TurboGrafx 16. After this, Super Bonk for the Super Nintendo would be the next new game in 1994. As of right now, the Bonk IP is held by Konami after they acquired Hudson Soft, which, you know, means we may never see Bonk again. Unless he becomes a pachinko machine or something. Spinning his way onto game consoles and into our hearts. Released in this week in 1993 for the Super Nintendo, was Taz-Mania. Taz-Mania features you playing as Taz the Tasmanian Devil. Speed your way down the long roads of Australia, avoiding obstacles along the way like cacti, electric poles, and buses. Also see other characters from Taz's show that would hinder his progress. Once you eat so many of those elusive, delicious kiwi birds, move on to the next stage. Now, in the 90s, the Looney Tunes were immensely popular. Syndication of the cartoons started gaining traction after cable network channel Nickelodeon started airing them in 1988. This got them a newfound audience with young kids. The sudden surge in popularity is what led directly to things like the 1996 movie Space Jam and those 90s shirts everywhere featuring hip-hop Looney Tunes. It's also how one particular character got his own show, Taz the Tasmanian Devil. His own spin-off series titled Taz-Mania premiered in 1991, running 4 seasons of 65 total episodes through 1995. In it, Taz has a full family of normal English-speaking Tasmanian devils. A mom, dad, brother, sister, and an uncle. Various side characters also show up to serve up some cartoon mischief and slapstick humor. Didgeridingo and Wendell T. Wolf, Francis X. Bushlad, Bushwhacker Bob, Constance Koala and Mr. Thickley, Bull Gator and Axel, Buddy Boar, the Platypus Brothers, the Kiwi, the Bushrats. Did I leave anyone out? Oh yeah, don't forget about Taz.
Put the Taz in Tasmania, down to Tasmania, come to Tasmania. We mean you!
The Super Nintendo game was based directly off of this animated series. Many of the side characters show up as additional obstacles to avoid in the game. Now, this isn't to be confused with Taz-Mania for the Sega Genesis. That was developed by an entirely different team and is an entirely different game. To give an idea of how much interest there was in Taz and the Looney Tunes at the time, Nintendo Power gave Taz-Mania a preview in issue 49. And GamePro magazine made the Sega Genesis game its cover for its June 1992 issue. People liked Looney Tunes, but did people like the game? Mostly, yeah. Electronic Gaming Monthly reviewed it with a solid 7 out of 10, liking the gameplay even if it got repetitive quickly, but still saying it's better than the Sega game. GamePro magazine was positive overall, despite its one-dimensional gameplay. Taz would go on to star in many more games, something reserved usually for the more popular, well-known Looney Tunes characters like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. He would get another Sega Genesis game with Taz in Escape from Mars and Tasmanian Devil Munching Madness for the Game Boy Color in 1999, with a couple of others. We're going from blabbering nonsense to big brain plays. Released this week for the Sega Genesis was Power Monger. Power Monger is a real-time strategy game. Command your armies through 3D landscapes, going from town to town to recruit more soldiers. They all have a mind of their own though, as they'll go about their own daily tasks, such as farming or making pottery. Defeat your enemies and convert a majority of towns to your side to complete each map to further your plans of conquest. Power Monger was originally developed for PCs by Bullfrog Entertainment, the company created by Peter, remember Milo? Molyneux. It was developed using the same engine of their other hit game, Populous. For the time, Power Monger was renowned for having pretty advanced AI. For a strategy game, there was very little micromanagement. Units were smart enough to get the best equipment possible, distribute things evenly, and even things like issuing orders can take a longer time the further away an army is, as a carrier pigeon delivers them the message. That was the PC version though. The Sega Genesis port suffers a bit. It runs much slower and clunkier with the interface, and the comparatively advanced graphics makes the whole game bog down. The biggest loss for the console port was that the computer version had a 2-player versus mode over LAN support, whereas the Sega game is single player only. With this many downsides, it would be easy to write the port off. However, reviews kind of liked it. GamePro magazine scored it with solid 4s out of 5 in every category. They called it a good adaptation despite its drawbacks, even though playing against the CPU, quote, isn't much fun. Power Monger would get additional ports over the years. It would also see itself onto the Super Nintendo, but only in Europe, and then it would get an enhanced Sega CD port. That port features better graphics, cutscenes, and gameplay that still runs at about 3 frames per second. After the Sega CD version, Power Monger would never get any other kind of port or sequel. It is possible to still play it today for free on the internet, as it's considered abandonware. And ignoring all micromanagement orders for every other release this week, here's Editor Dylan.
The SNES version of Yoshi's Cookie is just a souped-up version of the NES game we already covered back in April. And what's the biggest difference between the two? Besides the different developers, now the cookies are sentient. They can move and act on their own will with hopes and dreams of escaping this hellish nightmare of cookie segregation Mario puts them through day after day. They have eyes with expressive emotions such as fear and anger. The cookies are so desperate to escape Mario's clutches that they resort to throwing throwing themselves off a cliff to finally end their suffering. Also, Yoshi is actually here this time. You had one job, Tosei! Cool World is another game we already talked about, but the biggest difference between that one and these two is that they're worse. Go check out our February 24th episode if you want, but let's cover something we haven't talked about yet. I'd like to personally ask the entire fighting game community if there is any decent fighter on the Game Boy. Do they even exist at all? Because I have yet to play a decent one, and Raging Fighter is no exception. It's exclusive to the Game Boy, so I thought it was made specifically with 2 buttons in mind, like dive kick or something. So it must be adequate, right? How foolish I was. Controls are stiff and clunky. The backgrounds and characters all look the same, and there's no real story or fun to be had here. I will say it was made by 90s Konami, so you know the music and sound design is gonna be top notch. But I would rather play this one for a week than go through 1 more minute of Barney's hide and seek game for the Genesis. It's a survival horror game where a demonic T-Rex toy comes to life and frightens off the children. The horror aspect is the giant purple monster chasing the kids and squeezing the life right out of them. The survival part refers to your sanity, because it will not survive the torment of Barney's non-stop talking.
We can ride on the turtle. Look, it's a present. Oh boy, a ball. I see a clam. We found a present. We found a rubber duck. I see a friend.
And some of the stuff he says is questionable.
We can hug the bear. Here's a butt. Remember, I love you. Mwah.
8 games released on these 5 consoles this week in 1993. Sorry, I got a little dark in tone back there. The games we covered didn't offer much substance, and when you're bored playing a game, your mind will wander to explain things that didn't need explaining. But most of the time, I was just thinking, I could be playing Zelda right now. And the nanosecond this is uploaded, I'll be binging that game all weekend. That is also the real reason I didn't get any sleep. So sorry in advance if I get weird with the rapid fire releases again. I hope you all play a good game this weekend.
Thank you, Dylan. Here in the Collector's Corner, this week's biggest value gainer is Bonk 3. Just the game card alone is currently worth $455. The jewel case and the manual brings it up to $517. And if you think that's a lot, the Turbo CD version is worth 3 times that amount. Taz-Mania puts the drop in value dropper. It released costing $59.95, and now the game cartridge is only worth $7. The box and manual doesn't help it much, bringing it up to a paltry $30. I might be the only person in the world who remembers Power Monger. The original price was $49.95, and now the game goes for $12. Complete, it only rises up to $20. And that's it for today. Next week, badass racing, an overlooked platformer, and a cute shoot-'em-up that doesn't have any spaceships. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some patrons like Alexander Williams, Skizzy, and Super Bunny Bun. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, especially if you played any of the games of this week, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show every single Friday. When writing this episode, I was absolutely amazed at how much of the Taz-Mania cartoon show theme song was deeply ingrained into my brain and that I could immediately recall. Also, if you want to go back and watch the Taz-Mania show and that intro song alone, seizure warning.